I'm Mike Ward, and welcome to Conversations in Healthcare, a video series brought to you by DRG, part of Clarivate. This series examines the healthcare ecosystem and its current business challenges and opportunities. In each episode, I'll be talking to key leaders in the industry about how they're anticipating and navigating market dynamics. Our current season is focusing on healthcare innovation, and specifically how companies are ensuring inventions are translated into tangible benefits for patients. So in line with this, I'm delighted to be joined by special guest, Christian Hogg. Christian is an executive director and CEO of Chi-Med, a Hong Kong-based innovative medicines company, which is listed both on NASDAQ and the London AIM market. His company has ambitions to become a global leader in the discovery, development, and commercialization of targeted therapies and immunotherapies in both oncology and autoimmune diseases. While Chi-Med has a portfolio of prescription drugs and consumer health products that it's selling in China, it is also very active in discovering and developing innovative medicines. Indeed, Chi-Med was the first company to get a novel oncology product from discovery all the way through to unconditional approval in China. And it's also developing a pipeline of cancer drug candidates, which are currently in clinical studies, not just in China, but actually around the world. So consequently, Christian is ideally placed to talk to us about how to tap into China's emerging innovation potential. So Christian, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure.
So Christian, China historically has been seen as a source of APIs for the pharma industry around the world, but it's only in recent years that it seems it's been focusing more attention on actually becoming an R&D powerhouse. So could you, from where you're sitting, could you describe what that evolution is looking like?
That's a very broad-ranging question. Innovation in China, it has China has a reputation of being a producer of API and sort of raw material products for the pharmaceutical industry. It's one of the biggest sources of API worldwide. But actually, that has built up over the last 20 years. If you go back 20 years ago, the Chinese pharmaceutical industry just was a generic Me Too, sort of state-owned enterprise controlled kind of non-innovative industry. The Chinese government back then really sort of decided that they wanted China not to follow the path of India into basically being a global generic drug manufacturing center, but they wanted to turn China into an innovative pharmaceutical industry that could benefit not just patients in China, but patients all over the world. And that was a concrete decision that was made back in sort of the early 2000s. And so all Chinese government policy in this industry has, over the last 20 years, has gradually been building towards that vision and objective. Chi-Med is a company that was established 20 years ago. I mean, it was luck that we started at that time when the industry started to change. But we did start with a philosophy or a mindset of that we wanted to come in and we wanted to innovate for the global market. We wanted to harness the quality talent, scientific talent that exists in China and was available sort of through returnees back to China. So many mainland Chinese went to America to get their PhDs, went to work for big pharma, big biotech, And in the early 2000s, they started to return back to China. And so what we wanted to do is capture that and fund it and start really building our own discovery organization focused in oncology to try to create innovations for the global market. We were basically the only people with that mindset. Beijing also started a little bit later, but they had that same mindset too about trying to create innovation in China for the global market. And as I say, every step of the way, the policy and the reforms that have happened in the pharmaceutical industry have facilitated that. So I'd say back in 2000, the standard of care in most therapeutic areas, particularly oncology, was rudimental. It was very basic. You know, you had cancer, probably you're going to have access to chemotherapy, radiotherapy. That was basically it back in 2000. And, you know, that's just not acceptable. The Chinese government felt that wasn't acceptable. The people of China have access to the internet. They can see all of these fantastic innovations in oncology coming to the global market. And, you know, it was essential for patients in China to be brought access to these therapies. So the Chinese government started to do a number of reforms. They started to make it a lot easier to develop drugs in China. So historically, and this is even going back to sort of 2000, 2008, 2009, when we submitted our first INDs in China, you know, to start a clinical trial on a novel therapy. From submission to approval of the IND, it took 18 months. You know, just in America, it takes you 30 days. So it was very unwieldy. It was very bureaucratic. And then once you got to start your clinical trial, you do your phase 1, then you had to resubmit for phase 2 approval. That took 18 months as well to get the approval to go to phase 2. You know, whereas in America, you make that decision in a day. It's all your own risk. So the regulatory authorities in China, they really recognized that the system was too bureaucratic and it was too cumbersome. And they came with reform after reform after reform to make the regulatory environment more transparent, to engage with biotech companies, to understand what are the issues, how can we fix problems, and, you know, work really closely with industry to fix and sort of design a regulatory structure that was more relevant for a country that aspired to be an innovative pharmaceutical industry as opposed to a generic industry. And so step by step, the regulatory environment has improved dramatically. Now you can move very, very quickly. We have an NDA that was submitted just before COVID, and, you know, the regulatory authorities have not missed a beat. They've been on it. They've been interacting with us, you know, very, very helpful. So on the one side, regulatory reforms. On the other side, one of the major drivers of innovation in China is the expansion of access. So patients, if you go back to sort of 2005, 2006, there were maybe 10% of the Chinese population were on the main medical insurance scheme in China, the main medical scheme that reimburses drug users. Only about 10% of the population back in 2005, 2006. Today, that has expanded massively. So today, in the latest data for 2018, it's about well over 50% of the population is now on the main medical insurance scheme to reimburse drugs. And the other 50% are on the rural scheme that provides less reimbursement, but some. So you've gone from basically a out-of-pocket system where patients would have to pay out of pocket back 15 years ago to now 50% of patients or people in China are getting the majority of their innovative drugs reimbursed. And actually in the last 3 years, 40 innovative oncology drugs have been brought into the national reimbursement drug list. And that allows half of the population access to 40 very high quality global targeted therapies, from Avastin to Herceptin to Erbitux to, you know, to a full range of, you know, very important targeted therapies. And so we last year were able to bring fruquintinib, which is our VEGFR inhibitor. We launched it in 2018. We got it onto the reimbursement list at the end of last year. And, you know, the volume has increased massively because more and more patients now have access to it. So it's those two things that have driven innovation and investment in innovation. It's, you know, reform of the regulatory environment and vast expansion of access to these therapies. And it's all for the benefit of patients in China. And that's what's driving China to become a, you know, an industry, or the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry in China to become focused on innovation, those two things.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, because obviously with fruquintinib, you know, that was sort of very early on in that sort of that regulatory reform process. So you must have actually sort of, you know, been feeling that kind of pain and almost like pushing down the doors. I was going to ask you, okay, in that journey, what lessons did you learn that have shaped how you're now sort of progressing your other pipeline? But actually, it seems that it's more to do with the changes on the ground that has actually had the biggest impact on what you're able to do.
Yeah, you know, from the time it took us 18 months to get our fruquintinib IND approved back in 2009. You know, today with our new assets that we bring in, we have a new IDH1/2 dual inhibitor. We're about to start clinical trials in China. Again, in China, it doesn't take 30 days like the US, it takes about 60 days. So that IND was cleared very quickly. So the learnings from back, you know, 10 years ago are already obsolete in today's new regulatory environment in China. But, you know, things that are more recent. So for example, the fruquintinib NDA approval process, where we went through our inspections, we had the regulatory authorities come in and inspect our clinical sites, our clinical data, our manufacturing operations. This is all relevant learning. It's only 2 years old learning. And so now our second NDA for surufatinib it's our second drug, surufatinib, in neuroendocrine tumors. That NDA was submitted late last year. And so now we're going through the whole same process of NDA inspections and approval process with the regulatory authorities. And it's going quite smoothly because we know the system well. So it's very helpful. Now we have our third NDA being submitted shortly on savolitinib, which we're partnered up with AstraZeneca, the selective c-Met inhibitor. And I expect that will go even faster. So, you know, these experiences are very, very important. And you certainly build up your capability as time goes by.
I mean, it's interesting you're sort of saying about, you know, how things are getting faster. I was talking to a pharmaceutical executive who they're very much involved in China, and said that, you know, he was actually surprised at the pace that everything is done. That actually, you know, in the West, they think they're doing things quickly, but actually it's much faster in China. I mean, sort of reflecting on, for example, sort of, you know, the experience you have both of, you know, what happens in the West and what happens in China. If I was a biotech or a pharmaceutical executive thinking about China for the first time, you know, what are the differences that I would still have to, you know, embrace that I might not be necessarily aware of?
You have to, in China, I mean, you know, Chi-Med is not just a China company. We have 30 clinical studies underway around the world. We have a big clinical regulatory team sitting in New Jersey, developing 5 of our drugs in the US, Europe, and Japan markets. So we're not just a China company. And so we see drug development and the speed at which it goes in all markets. And I think your observation is right. These days, China is as quick as anywhere else. It's certainly not slower. So, you know, it's basically been able to bring its regulatory infrastructure and mindset to a similar level of that of the US FDA and the European regulatory authorities and the Japanese regulatory authorities. That's what's most exciting about China, is that it's kind of caught up and is now able to, you know, prioritize innovation. You know, there's still a lot of generic players in China, and you know, getting a generic drug approval is really slow in China because it's low on the priority list, and you know, Chinese regulatory authorities are not going to put a lot of effort into that. But on innovative therapies, they very much prioritize it. So they came in with priority review. They came in with a system called the market authorization holder system, which is really clever, that allows biotech companies to just really move quickly in multiple angles using third parties to do various things for them. So it's a, you know, I would say definitely the you know, the speed is as similar to that of the West. And if I were a Western company looking at a multinational looking at China, you know, you've got a lot of multinationals. They've been in China for a long time. Some of them have done very well. Some of them haven't managed to reach scale operations, haven't been able to bring their innovation in rapidly and take advantage of opportunities. And so the big question is, why have some succeeded and why have some failed? In my view, it all comes down to people. You know, you've got, in terms of clinical development, not many of the big multinationals are doing any discovery work in China. So it basically comes down to bringing global innovation into China. And to do that, you need to have well-established and functional clinical regulatory organization. And as I look at it, I see some of the multinationals, they have terrific teams, well-established, you know, deep medical affairs operations, deep interaction with the key opinion leaders in China, and everything works pretty well. You know, stable and sustainable teams. The multinationals that don't seem to be doing very well, they have a lot of turnover of people. They haven't figured out how to incentivize people properly. So, you know, certainly in clinical regulatory, it's quite a mercenary part of the pharmaceutical industry, because, you know, people come and go in clinical regulatory depending on the opportunities that are presented to them. But if you want to keep a stable clinical regulatory team, you need to incentivize them properly. So it's actually easier for biotech companies to keep a hold of these people and to incentivize them, because you've got share-based incentives you can use, and, you know, conventional tools that biotech industry uses to give those people part of the upside of their efforts. For multinationals, they're much more limited in being able to do that. And so for those that haven't reached critical mass and scale, you tend to see that they have high levels of turnover in these clinical regulatory groups. And as a result, they're not able to get their assets effectively through to approval quickly because they're not operating well. That's one issue. So I'd say, if I was an outsider looking into China, you've got to have a very clear strategy. Either you partner with a company like China who can do that for you, or you figure out a system that you can put in place, you know, an effective development organization that is going to be stable, incentivized, and working towards the objective of moving that innovation to approval as quickly as possible. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is commercial. You know, you've seen, again, it's the same story. With scale, commercial is more manageable. So AstraZeneca, Pfizer are just really, Roche, Bayer are very, Sanofi, they're all very effective commercial organizations in China because they've got scale. They've got businesses that are, you know, 3, 4, 5 billion US dollars in size, and a material portion of the global sales of these companies. So they're able to establish commercial organizations and scale them up and have them work. But then you've got a large tail of multinationals that struggle to build scale, and as a result don't have stable commercial organizations. And when you don't have stable commercial organizations, you're never going to, it's chicken and egg, you're never going to get to a healthy business. And you've got a lot of turnover in people as well. So if I was a multinational, I think China is very focused on innovation these days. I think regulatory authorities, all they want to do is bring world-class innovation to patients in China. They will do everything they can to support that. But multinationals looking at China, they need to decide, are they in China or are they not? If they're in China, they've got to invest heavily, they've got to build the infrastructure, they've got to make sure people are incentivized properly, and the business will come. If they try to do it on the cheap, or if it's not a kind of a central pillar of their strategy, China isn't a central pillar of their strategy, then they're doomed to failure. And you know, there's no two ways about it. You've either got to commit or just, you know, not expect miracles. But I think these days, with China being the second biggest pharmaceutical market globally, and with such a focus on innovation, you know, multinationals, if they're not looking at China seriously, then that's kind of a big issue. And so, you know, they do need to address it. But the other way, as I said earlier, is finding the right local partner. Chimed's a great example. You know, we partner with AstraZeneca, with Eli Lilly on the discovery and the development side, but we also partner with Merck and with AstraZeneca on the commercial side. So, you know, local players in the market in China are well established and are very capable of helping accelerate the growth of some of these multinational companies' assets in China.
Yeah, and I mean, as we sort of, I mean, if you look at, for example, the biotech world, it started in the States, spoke with an American accent for a long, long time. It began to take off in Europe, but obviously there was a lag, and it has been, growth has been slower. Do you sort of anticipate that China, given the fact that one, there's a huge market, two, that there's plenty of capital, and three, there is this velocity that they seem to put into everything? Can you sort of see China becoming spoken almost as in the same breath as places like Massachusetts or the San Francisco Bay Area or San Diego?
100%, absolutely guaranteed. It may take a few years, but the Chinese biotech industry is very well funded. You've got the highest levels of inflows of venture capital and private equity capital coming into China biotech at the moment. This global crisis around COVID is probably slowing things down a little bit, but it's a cyclical industry as well. But the flow has been enormous. So the amount of biotech businesses and companies that have been established over the last 5 years is enormous. The reason for that is everything I've just mentioned about expanding access, the regulatory reforms, and the fact that you've got 20% of the world's population in a single regulatory environment in China. You've got almost 30% of the world's cancer patients are in China. So, it's an enormous market opportunity, one where there are regulatory tailwinds, there are access tailwinds, and there are the economic growth of China. One of the first things you do when you see your economic wealth as a family increase is you ensure you have access to education, healthcare, and the kinds of things the necessities in life. So that's what's driving the investment in the industry. I think also you've had now probably a handful of companies that have done really well in biotech in China. You got Beijing, you got Chimed, you got Innovent, you got Junshe. You know, you've got a handful of innovators that have gone from a few hundred million market cap to multi-billion market cap. So investors see that and they say, okay, now you've got all the tailwinds, access and regulatory, you've got the patient population, and you've got companies that are effectively executing and delivering success and bringing innovation to patients. And so that's all you need all the ingredients you need to kind of cultivate a very vibrant biotech industry. And you add on top of that the Hong Kong Stock Exchange with their biotech initiative that is really, you know, going back 3 or 4 years, a loss-making company couldn't list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. You had to make profit, you know, real old-fashioned stuff. So there were no biotech companies on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Well, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange realized this was not right, and they put in place Chapter 18 of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange listing rules that allowed loss-making biotech companies to list in Hong Kong. So now there's been maybe, I don't know how many, certainly more than a dozen biotech listings in Hong Kong, probably closer to 20 over the last 2 years that are doing well. So you've got all of these factors are cultivating the biotech industry in China, and I think it's inevitable that it will emerge as, yeah, probably won't overtake the US for a number of years, but eventually it will. I'm convinced of it. Eventually it will.
That's a pretty bold prediction, but you're probably not wrong. So Christian, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today. This has been fascinating. Really interested to sort of, you know, hear, you know, what the company has done. The fact that, you know, for example, with, you know, the success you've had with fruquintinib, and your observations around, you know, tapping into the potential of Chinese innovation. So thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us. If after listening to this broadcast, you've either got questions for me or for Christian, please click the link at the end of the video, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear any feedback, because that feedback will help us improve and make conversations in healthcare as useful as possible. If you'd like to tune in, follow our LinkedIn page, because we'll be posting updates and alerts to future episode releases. So in closing, I'd like to thank Christian again for spending the time with us. I'd like to thank the listeners, and also like to say thank you and show appreciation from myself and colleagues at DRG and Clarivate to all those in the healthcare industry who are working tirelessly to, you know, improve the lives and of patients. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.